Welcome to Love and Abuse, the show about navigating the difficult relationship. From simple disagreements to emotionally abusive behaviors, you deserve respect and kindness. All the information on this show is meant for educational purposes only. Always seek a professional for your mental health and well-being, and always pick your battles wisely. I'm your host, Paul Coliani. Hey there. I have a challenge for you. The challenge is specifically for people who are with somebody who, they're emotionally abusive, they're controlling, or they have been, and now they say they are healing, or they are changing, or they are working on it. The challenge for you is to present them with a challenge. It's challenging because if you're with somebody like that, then you probably want to believe that they really are changing, and you may possibly not want to rock the boat. You may possibly not want to test their old triggers. Like, every time I talk to my ex, they got mad, and I don't want to rock that boat. I don't want to bring that up again because everything's going so well right now. And so you don't bring it up, and you hope that the healing continues, if it's real. Which is another question. Is the healing real? This is how you find out. You find out by challenging them with what is challenging to them. What is challenging to them is something they have learned to cope with in usually an abusive manner. The emotionally abusive person has learned to cope with challenges in an abusive way. When they were younger, this is what they did. They learned, we all do, we all learned how to survive as children through challenges, because we didn't know how to deal with challenges. And so we just did everything we could to survive. And what those survival mechanisms did for us is that we grew up and got into adult relationships. And if we haven't addressed those survival mechanisms, they may have turned into unhealthy coping mechanisms. And it's the same for almost everyone. Whether you're a victim of abusive behavior or the perpetrator of the abusive behavior, you have coping mechanisms that you rely on to get through challenges. And if those coping mechanisms no longer serve you or they're harmful, this is what causes a lot of difficulties in relationships. For example, one of my coping mechanisms used to be staying quiet and avoiding confrontation, because growing up in an alcoholic household when I was a child, it was better to stay quiet and avoid confrontation. And I never learned anything different. I just chose to stay quiet and avoid confrontation. So when I grew up, when I got into my teenage years and my 20s and my 30s, I got into older relationships. I took those coping skills, hardly the word skills, it's just a strategy, it's a mechanism. I took that into my adult relationships, and I used those to deal with the challenges. So if I had a challenge, like somebody got me angry, whether it was justified anger or not, I got angry, what would I do? I would go silent. I would be quiet. I would disconnect. I would detach emotionally. So the person I was with, typically romantic partner, would not know where I was and would feel completely alone. And that is an emotionally abusive behavior that stems from a coping mechanism. And just about all emotionally abusive behavior stems from poor, unhealthy coping mechanisms that were originally meant for something else. So if you're ever wondering why somebody acts in a certain way, it's typically because that's how they learned to act a long time ago. It's not an excuse, but it is a reason. It's not something that gives them a free pass. Oh, you were hurt as a child, so therefore if you hurt me, then it's okay because I have compassion for you and you shouldn't have gone through that, so I'll forgive you. Which is not something I want you to accept. You should not accept anyone's hurtful behavior, regardless of the origin. You do not have to accept anyone's hurtful or abusive behavior, regardless of where it came from. They were abused when they were a child, so therefore that's why they're abusing me. So what? It's sad when somebody's abused as a child, when any children are abused, absolutely. And then when they grow up, they have the opportunity to address those things. And some people do, and some people don't. And some people think it's perfectly normal, and they're the healthy one, and the other people are the toxic ones. And they need enlightenment. They need to figure it out. And sometimes hurtful people don't ever figure it out. Sometimes they continue doing what they're doing because that's all they know, and they believe that's how you're supposed to be. And they believe that the world must conform to who they are. And when the world doesn't conform to who they are and what they want, it's the world's fault. That's how they think. It's the world's fault. That's how many of them think, I should say. Some of them don't think that way. Some of them know what they're doing, and they still want the world to conform, but it's not an unconscious thing. The unconscious, this is what I call the unconscious abuser and the conscious abuser. And I'm just using the word abuser for brevity, just like I use the word victim for brevity. The unconscious abuser typically does all these old coping mechanisms and uses them for challenges in their adult relationships. The coping mechanisms they developed in childhood, they use in their adult relationships, just like I used silence and the silent treatment, and avoiding confrontation, which is basically the silent treatment, the way I did it, but also not expressing what's truly on my mind, avoiding confrontation, avoiding telling the whole truth, which would probably get the problems resolved faster if I just put it all on the table, even though there might be some upset. But, you rip the Band-Aid off really quick and say, this is what I'm feeling and this is what I'm thinking, and let's just talk about it. But I was never like that. I hid that part of me. I believed it was dangerous to show that part of me. And so for several decades, that's how I showed up, at least 3 decades of my life. Until in my late 30s, I decided that it was more important to express myself and stop being so silent. I mean, that decision actually came from a partner of mine, my last marriage. She said, I want the real you, because what I'm getting is this little boy. I was showing up as this little boy, this scared little boy. And she was 100% right. I was this scared little boy in our relationship who didn't want to express himself because of a fear of her reaction. Just like I was a scared little boy in childhood because of my stepfather's reaction. Didn't want to deal with it, didn't want to find out what happened. So I took that belief on how to respond to challenges throughout my life. And then I finally received the golden information that started the new trajectory of my life. And that's when my healing started. That's when I started learning about all these behaviors and all these old unhealthy coping mechanisms that we can carry around and cause so much trouble, so much difficulty in a relationship when we don't need to. And it's so much easier not to introduce those into a relationship because when we do, it creates problems. And so again, the behaviors of an abusive person, anyone that's emotionally abusive, controlling, manipulative, belittling, intimidating in any way, very likely stems from unprocessed, unobserved coping mechanisms that no longer serve them, and especially don't serve anyone else in their life. But to a lot of difficult or emotionally abusive people, they don't see it in themselves because they haven't lived outside of this box ever. That is their box. That's all they see. And so they see others as out of line. They see others as not good enough, not perfect, not showing up in the way they want. And so they become highly judgmental and highly controlling, even subtly. Like I was talking about the conscious versus the unconscious abuser. The conscious abuser knows what they're doing. They put you down. They make you feel bad. They know what they're doing. The overt abuser does things not in a subtle way. They are very overt. They are very forward aggressive, active aggressive. Where the covert type are more passive aggressive, where their energy is going inward in order to get what they want. And I think I've talked about this before if you've listened, but the overt abuser is very external and obvious. You can see what they're doing. You can hear what they're doing. You can feel it because everything is on the outside of them, where the covert abuser, everything's on the inside. They're scheming, they're manipulative, they're trying to control the outside world by not appearing to be a controlling person. So those are typically harder to spot, and usually the type of person where the victims of emotional abuse contact me and say, I'm not sure if I'm the abuser or they are. It's pretty obvious to tell who the abuser is when they're the overt one. But when they're covert, it is harder to tell. I have episodes on how you can tell who's the abusive person, but typically the covert abuser is the one that is planning things in their mind and being passive aggressive and giving the silent treatment and trying not to look like the bad guy and trying not to look like they're responsible for anything that's going wrong and that you're the one that's responsible. I mean, they both do this. You're the one that's responsible for everything wrong in the relationship, but they will make you believe it on your own. Let me rephrase that. The covert abuser will make you believe, make you come to your own decision that you are the problem, whereas the overt abuser says it out loud. They say, you are the problem. You're the bad guy. I'm using bad guy as a generic term. You're the one causing all these problems in the relationship. And then they're very overt about it. So I won't dwell on that, but you know what I mean. But it's helpful to understand what might be happening in a relationship that you're in, because if they are an overt abuser and you can't see it and you can't hear it, but you can feel it, then that gives you a clue of what might be happening. Usually, this is what happens. The victim of emotionally abusive behavior with the covert abuser will start feeling something is wrong, and they will start not being able to trust their own decision making and not trust their own instincts and their own ideas and beliefs, and that just slowly erodes those internal things that make you start to erode, because the passive aggressive covert abuser will make you believe that you are the problem. And so that breakdown happens inside of you. And that's why some people say, I just wish that the other person would hit me or yell at me or call me a bitch or a bastard, call me something so that I can look at that and say, there, that's the problem. Now I can do something about it. Now I can make a decision. Now I have something solid, something tangible that I can point at. So with the overt abuser, it's so much easier to point at the overt behavior and say, well, I don't want that in my life. It's very tangible. It's very easy to identify. Covert, it's very hard, but you can feel it. You know something's there. And some people can be both. Covert, overt. Some people have a combination, and these aren't black and white things, but it's just helpful to know that when you're with an overt person, it's easier to identify, and it's easier to not blame yourself. I'm not saying it doesn't happen, but it's easier to not blame yourself because you can look at them and say, wow, they have issues. And then the covert one, it's not. It's a lot harder. Most of the people that come my way, whether they are the victim in a relationship or the perpetrator in a relationship, like I worked with people in the Healed Being program, when I work with them, a lot of them have been covert. Very, very few have been overt. And I just want to clear something up too. I just realized that I said the conscious abuser is typically overt and the unconscious abuser is typically covert. It's not always the case. Sometimes they're overt and unconscious that they're doing it, even though it's obvious. It can happen, like I said. And it's the other way around too. Like sometimes they're conscious of it and they're covert and they do it anyway. And again, not black and white. It's not a on or off switch. It can go in a number of ways, but it's helpful to know where you may stand and what you should expect and look for, like what to expect from one of those, either of those, both of those, and also what to look for inside yourself. What are the symptoms? The symptoms usually start with something's wrong. That's like a thought that you might have. Something doesn't feel right, or something isn't right here. That's not true, you might say to yourself, but maybe they have a point. You might say that to yourself. You might think that because they're smart, because they seem pretty intelligent, that they must be right about you. And that can throw you off. That can start you doubting yourself. Just remember who you were. Remember who you were before the relationship, because who you were before the relationship is the person who should have been accepted for who they are. Who you were, who you showed up as before the relationship began, and maybe at the very beginning of the relationship, is who you should have been accepted as the whole time. And if you haven't been accepted that whole time, A, you're probably not listening to this show, and B, why haven't you been accepted? Why can't they accept you as you are? Why can't they look at you and say, I accept everything that you're showing up as because I love you? Why not? And why also can't they say to themselves, I can't accept that person, so instead of giving them a hard time, I will take care of myself and leave? Why can't it be that way? There are other options here. Why can't they say, hey, I can't accept what you're doing. I can't accept how you are. Let's talk about it. And that might mean they say, when you do this, I don't like it. And you might have to say, well, that's who I am. That could be the conversation. Or they could say, when you do this, I don't like it, and you're wrong and you're bad and you shouldn't do it anymore. And then you can question that. Like, well, I'm sorry you feel that way, but why are you telling me this? What do you want me to do about it? That's a good question. What do you want me to do about it? Well, I want you to change, they might say. But this is who I've been. This is who I showed up as in the relationship. So you're either going to accept me as I am, or if you can't accept me, then you need to work that out. I'm building a utopian scenario where everything is easy, I know. But that would be nice. It would be nice if a relationship started off that way, when one person doesn't like somebody else's behavior, and instead of giving them a hard time for that behavior, they just ask themselves, will I be okay with this behavior going forward? And if not, what am I going to do about it? And hopefully they don't answer, well, I'm going to give them a hard time. I'm going to make them feel bad. I'm going to guilt them until they stop. And if they do that, then that's a controlling, manipulative, and emotionally abusive relationship, which is what we don't want. And so I started talking about coping mechanisms, and the reason I did is because somebody wrote to me and said they just left their emotionally abusive partner 2 months ago. I don't know when this letter was written, so it could be a while back, but they said, he says he is getting help and changing, but he really hurt me. We were together for a couple of years, and he admitted that he had this issue with other people he dated. He said he would get help a year ago, and then he kept promising to change, but never did. And then this person asked, what are the chances of people with this condition changing? His dad was emotionally abusive growing up. All of his partners have left him. He lies about things. He screams and shouts, and he constantly devalues me and calls me names. He says I'm an idiot. I'm ugly. I don't meet his needs. I'm going to bankrupt you. You come from a lower class. I'm upper class, whatever. So this person asked, if he's been like this for years and hasn't changed, what are the chances he will? If I go back to the relationship, am I not signing up for years of abuse then? Or can they truly change? And they talk about some financial abuse too, using the money he has as a way to control this person. So thank you for writing that. I'm so sorry you're going through that. I'm glad that you said that you left this person I don't know if you've gone back since, but it's important that you took steps to protect yourself, because everything that you describe here is very, very toxic. And I want you to really latch onto that term. Some people have written to me and said, I don't like that term toxic, but it's the perfect term. It really is toxic to your soul. It is toxic to your spirit. It is toxic to your well-being, to your mental health, to your emotional health. A toxic substance is bad for your body. It is poisonous. And so when you are around toxic behavior, it poisons you. Part of that poisoning is the conditioning that you experience while you're with somebody like that, that makes you believe things will change. When you can see the trend of what has been occurring for months or years, the toxic effect of the relationship, of their behavior, causes you to believe something good is coming up. This is what toxic behaviors will do to the brain. It will make you believe that there has to be something good that's going to happen. They still have good in them. And so this is what I'm waiting for. This is why I'll stick around. So instead of necessarily looking at all the toxic soup that you're in and decide to get out of it, you stay in it. And that causes more poisoning of your mental and emotional health and your thought processes. But when you get out of it and you're away from the toxic behavior for a minimum of 2 to 4 months, when that fog starts to lift and things start to clear up for you, where you can look back and evaluate in a different way and perceive in a different way, then you start to have different thoughts. It sometimes takes longer because that fog can be very thick. But when it starts to lift and when you're away from the toxic influence, you start to see things more clearly. Now, with this person who wrote, you said it was a couple months, but here's what I would do. Because you asked, is it possible that a person like this can change? It is my opinion that anyone that has any ounce of empathy, that finally accesses it, and finally puts themselves in your shoes and realizes this is what it feels like, and finally feels bad for doing it, and they aren't a narcissist and they aren't, diagnosably a sociopath, then it is possible. But it has to be a self-initiated thing. And what that means is, even when you say, hey, you better change or else, and they say, okay, fine, I'll change, it's not very self-initiated. It's not very self-motivated. It has to be them having a realization where they finally come to that point and they realize, oh, I've been hurting this person for all this time. I'm finally realizing it and I feel terrible. I've seen so many people change at that moment, at that pivotal moment where they finally try on empathy and they finally put themselves in the other person's shoes. And when they're in that space, that's when change can happen. Doesn't always, but that's when it can happen. And you've been going through, the person who wrote, you've been going through a lot. You've been going through a lot of overt type behavior. It's easy to point the finger and say, wow, that's what's happening to me. And it's so easy to tell that I shouldn't be exposed to this. It's so easy for me to make that decision, even though it's a hard decision to make. I don't mean it that way, but it's easier to point at behaviors and say, I know exactly what's happening. And then to ask yourself, do I deserve this? And of course you don't. But it comes to you easier. The answers come easier. I'm not saying the solution is easy. I'm just saying the answers, especially to the question, is this emotionally abusive behavior? The answers are pretty easy to come to. So you need to be away from somebody for enough period of time, or at least out of the toxicity. You need to be out of the toxic behavior for long enough for you to reconnect with yourself. That fog has to lift. You need to reconnect with yourself. And you also need to be in a space of I won't take that anymore from anyone ever. That's your first part of this space that you need to be in. The second part of this space is that place of wonder that you're in, the place of, I wonder if this person will change. You need to, and I know it's hard, you need to take yourself out of that space. I wonder if they'll change. I wonder if they can change. You take yourself out of there and replace it with, they're either going to change or not. It doesn't matter if I wonder if it's going to happen or not. Even though that I know the curiosity is there, the hope might be there, but replace that with, they're either going to change or not. And then you can add to that, I'll know it when I see it. And that's the tough part for some people, but here's how you can tell. What did I say before? You challenge them with what challenged them. In the past, you challenge them with what challenged them. Now, I'm not saying to do this with violent people. I'm not saying to do this with somebody that you fear. If this person who wrote to me fears their ex, then they need to stay away from their ex. Period. That's like, if you have a fear of somebody and that person is capable of damaging you and causing more damage, then you just have to stay away. And I'm not telling you to do that. I'm just saying when you are around toxic behavior, it continues to poison you. And so when you're around it, you continue to be affected. Your thinking is affected. And the longer you're away from it, the more clear you get. And you have to get to that point where you're so clear that you are okay if you ever get into that relationship or not. You're okay if that relationship doesn't work out. Because there are some people who, yeah, they will change. And when they change, you'll know it. You'll know it because they'll be so different, you won't recognize them. What? You used to get mad when I talked to my ex, and now you support it and you encourage it, and you even gave me a ride over to see my child. Who are you? This doesn't make any sense. And by the way, if emotionally abusive people are listening to this show right now, which I know they do, some listen to gain some tools. They think they're going to gain some tools and figure out what they need to do to placate the other person so they don't have to change. Here's the thing. If you are the perpetrator of hurtful behavior and you hear me say, oh, all I have to do is pretend that I'm supporting them and don't have a reaction when they do something that I used to react about, then they'll think that I have changed and they won't leave me and I can be who I am and not have to change myself. Because that's what happens. Some emotionally abusive people don't want to change. They believe they're right 100% and they're not going to change for anybody. It's the other person that has to change. And so some people will listen to this show and they'll get these thoughts and these ideas and they'll think, I'm going to use that against them. Here's the good news. It's nothing but good news, really. I mean, it's some bad news. The bad news is, yes, they may trick you. They may use what I'm saying as a way to get away with something for the first time, maybe the second time, but they won't be able to hold it in. Because that third or fourth challenge that comes their way, they're not going to be able to handle it. They haven't worked on their coping mechanisms. They haven't learned how to heal that. They haven't learned how to accept you exactly as you are. And so it gets revealed, is what I'm saying. When somebody gets challenged for something they said they're over and they've healed from, and that challenge comes a second time, a third time, you're going to see a shift. And they will return back to who they were, unless they've healed. And so anyone who's listening to this show who thinks, I'm just going to pretend, it doesn't work. At least it doesn't last. It may work at first, but this is why I put this information out there, because the victims of this type of behavior, most of the people that listen to this show, this is what you need to look for. This is why you present them with the challenge. You talk about the challenge. You open it up. You put it on the table. You talk about it like it's a normal thing now and it's no longer a trigger, and see where they go with it. Because anyone who hasn't dealt with their coping mechanisms and healed and released them and is now a different person because they now know how to deal with challenges differently. And hopefully these things aren't challenges to them anymore, so they won't react. You're going to notice it. You're going to wonder who they became. Like, where is the person I knew? That's where you should be when somebody heals. You should see a different person. And it's not just in one or two things. They just change overall. And you won't recognize them. So if you ever think, oh, they're just going to pretend, it's possible they will at first. And then eventually their behaviors will come back. And eventually means once or twice that it happens again. That's why it's important to challenge them with what challenges them. If talking to your ex challenges them, talk about it more. Talk about it openly. Again, if it's not a dangerous situation to you. If they are the type that becomes jealous and upset and they said, no, I'm healed now and I'm changing and I'm doing great, then whatever upset them in the past, whatever made them jealous, needs to happen again. That doesn't mean you overtly flirt and try to push the limit, because most of the abusive behaviors come from benign things, the very normal things that we do day to day. And so you won't have to push it that far. You'll just have to do it, talk about it, open it up, and see where they are with it. See if they are okay with it. See if they are reacting. Watch for the subtle clues, not the overt clues. The overt clue might be, oh, that's fine. I have no problem with it. The subtle clues are their body language. The subtle clues are the little things, the nonverbal clues that you can tell something's going on. Like you can tell they have a problem with it, but they're not necessarily saying they do, but there's something going on inside them. And if there is, meaning you can tell, that means they know something is going on inside of them as well. And if they truly are healing and changing, hopefully they'll say, I am having a little reaction and I need to deal with it. I need to reflect on that. And I don't want to take it on you, so I want to go deal with this myself and figure it out. And hopefully they do. That is a sign of change. It's not a sign that they've changed, but it is a sign of change. It is a sign of progress, typically, because the one who isn't healing or the one who doesn't want to change isn't going to say anything like that. And again, they may hear me say this on the air right now and say, oh, that's all I have to do. I'll just have to say, oh, I'm having feelings about this, so I'm going to go process that and reflect on it. That's fine. That may be fake. That may be real, but you'll know soon enough. It will always reveal itself. Bad behavior reveals itself. And you will find emotionally abusive comments and emotionally abusive behavior bleeding into other areas of your life. You will sense it, you will feel it, and you'll be able to recognize it because you'll be aware of it. This is something you have to work on. It's something you have to practice. But that's what you can look for. You can look for change in repeated behaviors. They do it over and over and over again, meaning, hey, I'm talking to my ex again. I'll keep using that example. And they aren't having a fit. It's not a problem. And they are even supportive of it. And it just seems like they do that every time now. They don't seem affected anymore. So if that's the case, great. Maybe they aren't. So what other challenges are there that you might have to introduce? And so I said earlier that you want to introduce these challenges. You don't want to hide from them. When you, and I know there's might be some PTSD here, when you have had some abusive behaviors from somebody that you don't want to deal with that anymore, so you try not to bring certain things up. But if they say they're healing and changing, that's what you do. You have to bring those things up. And you have to find out if this is something they've gotten past. Because if they haven't, you're not going to see any change going forward. Because they are still in that space. They need to work on it. What does the emotional abuser need to do to heal? They need to work on their coping mechanisms. They need to join my program. I have the Healed Being program. I worked on this for 1.5 years when I started it a couple years ago. And it is the step-by-step guide to help you through this. So if somebody's listening that needs this, that's what I do. That's exactly what I do to help. So that is available to you. And if you don't do that, seek therapy, do something so that your life can start changing. Your relationships can start changing. The people who came to me who were emotionally abusive have told me things that are clearly hurtful behaviors, yet they say they love the person they're doing them to. And when I hear that, I challenge them with the question, why do you do things to purposefully hurt or make someone feel bad if you love them, and knowing that those behaviors will only push them farther from you? Why would anyone do behaviors that pushes people away from them when they love them? That's the enigma, right? You don't understand why they're hurting you if they say they love you. How could they possibly love you if they keep hurting you? We go right back to whether they're conscious about it or unconscious about it, or they're unaware of their lifelong coping mechanisms that simply aren't working anymore and they need to work on them and heal them. And also, and this is the big also, they need to know that they're not right. The emotionally abusive person needs to know that they aren't correct. They need to accept that what they believe is true isn't. I went a long time believing my behaviors were necessary because that was how I felt safe and comfortable, not necessarily happy. I thought it was happiness, but I felt safer and comfortable because I was relying on these old survival skills that no longer served me. And I wasn't aware that I was wrong. And so I believed wholeheartedly that I was right and I needed to do this so that we could both be happy. And that was the downfall of all my relationships. And so I had to learn that my behaviors weren't right. If you believe that someone needs to feel guilty in order to conform to what you want them to do for you, or for, quote, do it for the relationship, if you believe you're 100% right, then you're not going to back down, because that is something that's been driving you all your life. And it could be something very old. To the perpetrator of hurtful behavior, if you don't believe you're being hurtful, look at your results. Are you getting that close intimacy, that close connection that you know you want and know you deserve, but you keep pushing them away? And do you blame them for being pushed away? That's not how it works, because people love to be accepted for who they are. And the more you accept them for who they are, the closer they want to be to you. That's typically what happens. There are other reasons why we might separate and go our own ways, but when you accept somebody fully, 100%, that is the most loving thing you can do for somebody else. So to the person who wrote to me and asked me, is it possible that a person like this can change? Absolutely. If they have that criteria, if they have empathy, if they put themselves in your shoes, if they finally have a revelation that they are the cause of these problems and they believe wholeheartedly in themselves that they need to change. They believe it for themselves, whether you're in their life or not. They need to believe it. If they don't believe it and they just want to placate you, you're going to notice. But it's important that you both have your own space to heal, because you need to heal too. You have a lot more healing to do than they do, believe it or not. This is very, very typical. A victim of emotionally abusive behavior will often need a lot more time to heal. A lot more has happened inside of them. Where the abusive person, once they realize they need to heal and they accept it fully and they feel awful about it, healing can come fairly quickly, not for everyone, but it usually is quicker than the person that's been hurt. Because the person who has been hurt has had their self-worth damaged, their self-image damaged, their intuition, their beliefs about themselves, their trust. So much has been damaged. And when that has been damaged, it takes a long time to rebuild. So there can be a disparity when one person heals faster and the other one is still working on it. And it might take a long time, much longer than the other person. And the other person will say, but I'm healed now, I'm not hurting you anymore. And the victim will say, I'm still trying to figure out who I am. I lost myself in this relationship. I need to find myself again. I need to rebuild that. And then when they rebuild, will they still want that person in their life? This comes back to that letter. It said, will they change? It's possible. He can change, but it's vital that you find yourself again, reconnect with yourself. And you are in a space where you say, I will never accept that behavior from that person or anyone else ever again. Period. And if you decide that you want to test the waters and find out if he's changed or not, bring those challenges. Don't move back in, because you need to challenge over and over again. You need to find out where he is and how he handles challenges. Because a healed abuser, one who no longer does that behavior, is going to respond a lot differently. They're going to show up a lot differently. You won't even recognize them. The direct answer to that person's question, which is, what are the chances that he'll change? The answer really comes down to whether he's using the relationship as his reason or his incentive. If he's using the relationship as a reason to change, then change is highly suspicious. Seeing him change will be highly suspicious, because let's just say that the relationship wasn't in the picture anymore. Would he still change? Would he still work on himself? Would he seek therapy? Would he go to healed being, whatever? Would he do what it takes to change? Because he knows he needs to, because he knows he's unhealthy, or he has unhealthy coping mechanisms and needs to work on his emotional triggers and all of that. If he knows all of that and he still goes forward with it and he's still working on it, and you can see visible change, that's different than somebody who says, well, if you're not in my life, I'm not going to change, because what's the point? That is somebody who is relying on you to change, which means they aren't self-realizing it. They aren't self-actualizing the change they need to make for themselves. That's a huge difference. So the question of what are the chances is based on what they believe about themselves. If the emotionally abusive person says, I need to work on this and heal this, and I won't stop until I'm healed, and I won't get into another relationship unless I have stopped these behaviors and I've stopped getting triggered because it's that important, then the chances are good. But it does take your observation. Be observant, be diligent, and test them with challenges, and pick your battles wisely. As always, thanks for listening. I hope this helps. Share this with others who might benefit. Love and Abuse is the official podcast of the Mean Workbook, an assessment and healing guide for difficult relationships. The workbook helps you pinpoint exactly what's going on in your relationship, outlining the behaviors causing you to leave so many interactions feeling bad. Take the assessment in the workbook and gain clarity on what your next best steps are. Visit loveandabuse.com for more information. And if you've discovered that you are doing hurtful behaviors to someone that you care about and you'd like to change that about yourself, sign up for the Healed Being program over at healedbeing.com. You can take the course on your own at your own pace, or join the optional private online group where I and others will give you direct support. It's time to stop making those you love feel bad. That's healedbeing.com. And if you're looking for a safer way to listen to this show where all the titles to the episodes are changed, click on the Safe Listening button on the podcast page over at loveandabuse.com. This show exists to remind you that you are not alone and you're not going crazy. You deserve to be treated with respect and kindness. You deserve honesty and sincerity. You deserve to be treated as worthy and significant, because you are. We'll talk again soon.